Hello and welcome everyone to the Gospel According to Marvel. I am Derek Weston.
I'm Zane Sanders.
And this is episode 3 of the Gospel According to Marvel. And so thanks for coming back. Today we're going to be looking at Iron Man 2. And I'm actually in the middle of watching Iron Man 2 this week. I texted Zane and was like, dude, this movie's way better than I remember. So we'll get into that a little bit in a few minutes. But so let's talk about what's going on with Marvel right now before we jump up. What's going on in the MCU? Yesterday, we're recording here March 2nd. Yesterday, there was a new trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Zane, did you see that?
Yes, I did.
What were your thoughts?
It was so good. I love, again, how they don't disclose too much of the story while at the same time getting you excited for what's coming.
Yeah.
The reveal of Kurt Russell, who we knew who he was going to be, but seeing that... and just watching their interactions as a team is just really cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, and it was. I think it was cool that the trailer kind of ends with the reveal of Kurt Russell, which I thought was really a nice touch. I wasn't sure that if they were actually even going to show him in the trailers at all. So it was cool that they kind of threw him in there at the end, but. Yeah, I think one of the things that that I'm really excited for is, you have the first movie was about them kind of coming together, and this movie seems so much more about their group dynamics, which just seem hilarious. I mean. Drax was kind of the favorite for me of the first movie, and I don't want to get into this too much right now because he was just like this very low key kind of humor, took everything very literally, and I think I see a lot more of his kind of dry humor coming out. Rocket and Groot are of course like the scene stealers, but I love the way Drax's humor comes across in this trailer, and it was just really I don't know. I feel like I've been suppressing my excitement for this movie, and now with each trailer, I'm just like, all right, just give it to me. I'm so ready for this.
Yeah. Well, and it's coming up soon, so there's good reason to be excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was interesting. In the reveal for Kurt Russell's character, Ego. I noticed that Mantis was on the ship with him.
Oh, interesting. I have to watch that again.
So that's an interesting addition. Also, James Gunn had said that everything from that trailer is really from the first 15 minutes of the film, which is crazy to me because that boosts my expectations even more, because I feel like, okay, if we've only seen the first 15 minutes and we're this excited, it's going to be really good, and there's going to be things that we're not expecting that are coming to us, so I'm excited about that.
Which is also really awesome because that, the thing about it is, if that's the first 15 minutes, I don't know that, I might need to wear Depends or something. I just there's a good chance that I will have an accident of some sort. The team is expanding. Nebula's a part of the team, and Mantis is a part of the team, and Yondu's a part of the team. And so even adding to that, and if that's all of that is happening earlier in the film, I can't wait.
Yeah,
this is gonna be so good.
It's gonna be excellent.
And then right before we started recording, Zane reminded me that there was a new Iron Fist trailer, so I just watched that. I think we've talked about this before. Iron Fist is just a character I don't know really well, and I think one of the things they've done really well with the Netflix series is introducing us to characters that aren't very familiar, and kind of bringing them to the forefront. And I think with this one, I'm kind of like, this is maybe the character I know the least about, and so I'm like, I'm gonna be there day one, St. Patrick's Day, and just lock in, grab a couple beers, and just watch Iron Fist all day. But I'm more curious than excited. Like, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm like off the charts excited. Iron Fist, I'm like, let's see how this goes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to it, especially after Luke Cage. I think they just Netflix can do no wrong to me right now. So
yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty excited.
They've earned a lot of goodwill. So, and they've, I mean, Marvel, the MCU in general has kind of earned my trust. Like, like there's just kind of like, okay, you guys. Oh, okay, go ahead. But
do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want. I'm yours. Take my money. But yeah, and then the one thing that I did like was Rosario Dawson's character Claire is being it seems like there's going to be some overlap to what we saw in Daredevil season 2. Some of the mystical elements of Daredevil season 2 seem to be going into Iron Fist, and that's the thing that was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, I'm ready to see that, because I think that was actually one of the more compelling loose threads from Daredevil season 2 was sort of the more mystical elements.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of excited to see how that plays out.
Well, and as far as I know, is Defenders slated to come after Iron Fist, or is there another season of something else?
No, Defenders is after Iron Fist.
Okay, so this series should connect to them all at some point, I would think. Or at least like begin that towards the end of this season. So.
Right. This is the one that because I mean, and again, like Rosario Dawson's character seems to be the connecting point.
Right.
So like what she's experienced at the end of Daredevil 2, plus what she's experienced through Luke Cage and Luke Cage's connection to Jessica Jones. I mean, I think eventually this is setting the table for all 4 of these characters to be brought together, and pretty excited for that.
Well, and really, it's like the Iron Man 2 of the Netflix MCU.
Good segue, man. That was a professional podcast segue.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. Did you see Iron Man 2 in the theater when it came out?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm wondering if that's part of why. Because there were a handful of MCU films that, I can't imagine this happening now, but there are a couple of them that I did wait for them to come out on video, and Iron Man 2 was one of them.
Okay.
And maybe that's what affected my enjoyment. Because I'm trying to, like, as I recall this time of my life, this is 2010. I had a fairly young son. There's probably a lot of sleep deprivation, so maybe that's part of why it just didn't stick with me the way that it did before. What were your initial thoughts when you saw it the first time?
I just remember really loving. This is like, it's a segue movie in a big way, because it introduced Black Widow. It showed more of Nick Fury and kind of what S.H.I.E.L.D. was going to look like. It brought in War Machine, and I just remember being so excited about all of that. One of the biggest criticisms about this movie when it came out was that, it's just another like villain that puts together an Iron Man suit, his version of an Iron Man suit, and fights against Iron Man. And I think that's a stupid thing to complain about because it's Iron Man. You need, like, the villain's gonna need some kind of suit or magic power to fight against him. You know what I mean? Right. So it's not. I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I remember seeing it. I think I saw it maybe twice, 3 times. I was doing college ministry at the time, so of course we'd go with students.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about, working with that age group is like, oh, hey guys, this is work. Let's go to the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there is. I mean, this is one of those. We haven't talked much yet here about the phases of the MCU as the producers talk about it, but this is really, in some ways, this is kind of the phase 1 connective tissue. Yeah. Phase 1 is all of the films that we've talked about so far, and all of the films that are leading up to the Avengers. And so the only things that are left for phase 1 that we haven't talked about are Thor, Captain America, and the first Avengers film.
Avengers, yep.
But this is really the connective tissue that is beginning to form this larger world that is going to culminate with the Avengers. And it was really interesting to me as I was watching it. You're already beginning to see this idea of the government wants control of these folks, this superpowered guy.
Surprise.
It's always the government. No, and interesting. Senator Stern is a character who reappears in Winter Soldier, and we find out some things about him. No spoilers. But again, they're trying the immediate kind of conflict in this film is that the government wants control of Iron Man, and Iron Man saying, well, no, of course not. Yeah. You can't have control of Iron Man.
That whole scene in the courtroom is great.
It is great. It's really fun.
Like solid Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr.
It's so good. I mean, it's so funny of him being able to take shots at Senator Stern, take shots at Justin Hammer, and again show how cool and how like he's 3 steps ahead of everyone, and at the same time you also get Pepper's kind of like, oh my gosh, like can you tone it down a little bit? Can you just be a little bit less you right now?
I actually felt like the relationship that they built up between Tony and Pepper was one of the better relationships in the MCU. Like, they took their time in building that and making that happen.
Yeah, and I think that's actually an underappreciated part of the MCU is that Pepper is she's a very well fleshed out character over the course of the MCU. She's and part of that is, when you get an actress the caliber of Gwyneth Paltrow to play a character in these kinds of films, they're going to bring something to the table that no-name actress might not be able to or not even no-name, but like a lesser actress might not bring to the performance. But she's well fleshed out. She's kind of Tony's conscience. She's a love interest, but she's also like she's his conscience. She's what grounds him. She's what keeps him connected to the real world in some very practical ways. And it's actually very cool, I think, when he's like when he finally does give her control of the company. It kind of just like that's a good move. Like, just intellectually, like you clearly can't do this.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it is more so than I think none of these characters have great relationships. But I do think that Tony's relationship with Pepper is one of the better explored relationships in the MCU.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting characters who I really hope we see some more of in the MCU going forward is Justin Hammer.
Yes. That's my last note that I made, is that we better see Justin Hammer again, because Sam Rockwell did such a fantastic job. Good. And as far as like villains go, he wasn't developed as much as maybe he was in the comics.
Yeah.
And I think he definitely still has connections to both, everywhere in the MCU, but specifically his name popped up in Luke Cage too, because he kind of helped create some of
the gun that they used against him, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So. And he's kind of a he's like, I mean, for lack of a better term, he's like your poor man's Tony Stark. Like he's smart, but he's not as smart. He's handsome, but he's not as handsome. He's like even one of my favorite scenes is so earlier in the film, they're at the Stark Expo, and Tony comes out, and there's these dancers behind him, and there's all these fireworks and explosions and stuff, and there's this huge audience applause, and Justin Hammer comes out to the expo, and he's kind of like doing this dance that's just like, what the hell are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
And he's so much trying to be Tony Stark.
Yeah.
But just can't pull it off.
Even the audience is like
yeah, all right, whatever. Let's get on with it. And he wants to be. He's this mediocre version of Tony Stark, and again, what's interesting about him that we see him, he is connected with the government. He is the one who is doing the government contracts, and he is the one who's like, yeah, I can sell weapons to the government, and I can make my fortune that way. He is, and again, I think I don't think enough can be said about the MCU casting. Sam Rockwell he just brings so much to this performance of making this pretty unlikable character, and still making you like you like to not like him. You enjoy disliking him.
Right. It's funny because he was actually considered for the role of Tony Stark. He was one of the top names in that before Robert Downey Jr. got it. So it's funny that he still made it in and was able to pull that off.
And that makes it even better, because it does feel like he's the second place winner in the Tony Stark contest.
Yeah. That's funny.
So you mentioned already we have the intro of Black Widow, and I actually watching it the second time, or I don't know, second or third time, her introduction was a lot more subtle, considering the role that she has in the MCU.
Right.
What were your thoughts about how Black Widow is handled and used in this film?
Well, and so despite the fact that she hasn't had her own solo movie yet,
yes,
the way they introduced her was really well done, because they definitely insinuate that she has a long past with S.H.I.E.L.D., which you see as we continue over the course of the MCU, but she just sort of jumps in, and like you said, very subtly, you aren't expecting that she's Black Widow until that makes a lot of sense. That she is exactly who I thought she would be.
Yeah.
So
she's this woman from Legal who also has incredible boxing skills for some strange reason. Yeah, and again, she is one of the things that I love to hear is that Scarlett Johansson is still kind of lobbying for the solo Black Widow film, which I think everyone would love to see. But she's such an important part of the story going forward, and she is one of those characters who, despite the fact that she hasn't been in her own solo film, has reappeared in so many of the films that follow, and usually as a fairly significant piece of the puzzle. I mean, it's fun to see that they introduce her as kind of infiltrating Stark Enterprises and being able to work her way up to this point where she's very close to Tony Stark, and we kind of see why it is that she is as close as she gets, because she's kind of evaluating him.
Yeah,
which I think is
like a
cool
test to get into the Avengers, kind of like what it seems like Tony's doing to Spider-Man later.
Exactly.
It's funny. In the scene when Tony asks Natalie Portman if she actually speaks Latin, and she says something, what she actually says in Latin is the appearances of things are deceptive. Which, I mean, is very Black Widow.
Sure. Absolutely.
I thought that was cool.
And good, extra points for getting the Latin deciphered for us. And that's who she is, right? I mean, she's this character who, her whole MO, as we see her going forward, is this deception, this covert kind of operations, and she's more spy than soldier, and it's kind of interesting to see her character appear in these films, and the way that they use her going forward is, I think, she's deserving of her own film, and
definitely,
and that's not just because of my love for Scarlett Johansson.
I think I would even be happy if they don't want to go the route of having her own solo film, which they absolutely should.
Yes.
They should still, I think it would be cool to have Hawkeye and Black Widow do a Netflix series together, kind of like a S.H.I.E.L.D. Type thing, especially now, well, spoilers, future stuff. Yes, that would be cool.
Yeah, I think a Black Widow and Hawkeye movie, a Black Widow and Hawkeye series, if we're not going to get a solo Black Widow,
which would be my first choice,
which is still the preference for the solo Black Widow film.
Yes.
So there's this line that hold on, let me make sure that I don't want to jump around too much. So our kind of main villain in the film, what do you, again, kudos to Marvel for the excellent casting here. But what are your thoughts on sort of our main villain?
He makes a lot of sense. The whole connection with Tony's dad, and this theme that you continually see come up in all of the Iron Man things, but here especially is legacy. And I think Ivan Vanko is also thinking very much about legacy, but also revenge in a big sense. And so he's attacking the legacy of Tony Stark. And so he is actually more developed from the beginning than maybe some of the other villains that have been in the MCU. I think during that full opening credits sequence where you can see him going through building his version of the arc reactor, just is really well done in introducing the character and kind of explaining his connection to Tony, and they do a really great job with that. But as far as Ivan Vanko goes and his role as Whiplash, it was cool to see his outfit even transition, the way it grew towards the end. And his end goal wasn't to win or to do anything, but to really take Tony Stark down, either in reputation or like take his life. But
yeah, one of the things that he says in the film, there's this great line that he uses. He says, "If you can make God bleed, people will cease to believe in him." And like there's a bunch of things about that I want to get into, but it seemed like part of his plan was like I think he was like, definitely, if I can bring Iron Man down, that would be great, but if I can just show the world that Iron Man is vulnerable, then that's just as good. Because if I can show that he's vulnerable, then more people like me will come out of the woodwork and challenge him, which is pretty. I mean, like, if you're a bad guy with revenge on your mind, like that's really good long range planning. It's like, it's not just about like me getting my revenge. It's about like if what I can do is just show that this guy is not, to use a comic book title, the Invincible Iron Man, then I can create hell on earth for this character, for Iron Man, and that in and of itself is a win. Is that he can be tortured forever by the likes of me, who will challenge him and show that he's not as powerful as he thinks he is. I thought that was a great line.
I think it also, that line specifically, if you can make God bleed, then people cease to believe in him. I think that's counter to what our faith says,
right?
In a big way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, say a little bit more. I mean, I think I know where you're going with that, but like, say a little bit more about what you mean by that.
As far as Christianity goes, like, the whole fact that Jesus came, died on the cross, and like did bleed for the sins of the world is a huge. I mean, it is the point of Christianity, and so I just definitely goes counter to what Ivan Vanko says.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think our understanding of Christianity is that power looks like vulnerability, right? Yeah. Power looks like sacrifice. Power looks like the one who's willing to bleed. And that is so what we see in these films so often is the counterpoint of this is how power looks in the world. Power looks invincible and strong. I mean, that's what we want superheroes to be, right? Is we want them to be invincible. We want them to be powerful. We want them to be able to save us and still be able to fly away at the end. But so much of what we believe, what our faith teaches, is that real power is the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to be hurt, the willingness to sacrifice for others. Yeah. And ultimately, that's also where a lot of these films come down, is that a lot of these heroes in their most heroic moments are also the ones who are willing to sacrifice for the greater good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a cool line, and very well delivered by Mickey Rourke as Ivan Vanko. He has another great line. After he's, I've always loved this. I've always kind of, this is this is I don't know. Feel like this is a more recent development in superhero movies. Is like a villain appears and gets defeated kind of earlier in the film, and then you have an interaction between the villain and the hero in some sort of prison setting. The Dark Knight does this, to perfection. But in this film, Tony and Whiplash fight, and then Vanko's in prison, and Tony comes to find out who this guy is and to talk to him. And again, Vanko has another great line. He's talking about a big piece of the storyline is that the original arc reactor in Tony's chest, or the arc reactor in Tony's chest, is beginning to poison him. And Vanko has this great line where he says, "The thing that is keeping you alive is killing you." Mm-hmm. And I think that's of course, in this very practical sense, there's this metal in his body that is poisoning his blood, but I also think it's kind of saying being Iron Man, not just the poison of this metal in your body, but like being Iron Man, the thing that all of a sudden gave your life purpose is also the thing that like is sapping the energy out of you and making you kind of self-destructive and alienate your friends and blah blah blah.
Wow. Yeah, that's great observation.
I just think there's I don't know, maybe everything just feels more profound when it's said with a Russian accent, but it just felt like that interaction was, and I really wish, I wonder if they added that scene because they actually don't get very much screen time together.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, they fight.
The 3 scenes.
Yeah.
The 2 of them fighting and that one, yeah.
And to have these 2 really good actors, I mean, I really feel like that prison scene was so important because, one of the things that I think is always kind of fun is when you see 2 really good actors kind of bouncing off each other and playing off each other. And this is just a really well-acted scene between these 2. And I just really, I wish the 2 of them would have had a little bit more time together.
Yeah.
But I really kind of liked how, they played off each other and talked about.
This is definitely one of those villains that, like, it's really disappointing that at the end, spoiler, he dies.
Yeah.
It's really disappointing because he would have been fantastic to see later do something else. I heard Mickey Rourke didn't really get along with Marvel very much during the filming, so maybe that's good in general. But
yeah, I've heard that too.
As far as storyline, I think it would have been really great to have him around.
And just in general, I'm not a fan of killing off villains. So there's that element of it. So, question for you, and you might know this. This is a little bit more. This is kind of more behind the scenes, but my understanding is that the character that we see on screen, like, is very different from the Whiplash of the comics. And that it was actually somewhat more of a mix between Whiplash and another Iron Man villain who is known as Crimson Dynamo.
Crimson Dynamo, yeah.
Okay, so is that accurate? Did I make that up? Okay.
Yeah, they, I think, from what I've read, they didn't want to do Crimson Dynamo because of, it's basically very similar to Ironmonger. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to have something a little different, but they did want to go that route of having that connection point with Tony's dad.
Okay.
So they sort of did a combo. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense because because he actually ends up in a suit at the end, and which looks kind of sort of ish like Crimson Dynamo, and then like Whiplash is kind of a fairly minor character in the comics. Like he's not one of like Tony's big arch villains.
Right. He just kind of pops up every now and again. And he's annoying. So.
He seems more like henchman-y than like big bad villain kind of guy.
Right. Yeah. Like not the brains behind.
Yeah. Which Vanko clearly is in this film.
Right.
Like he clearly is, and again more so than Justin Hammer. Kind of shows an intellect that rivals Tony's.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. They kind of, in some ways, they kind of split Tony in two and created two different villains. You got Justin Hammer, who kind of feels like the pseudo like playboy version of Tony Stark, and then Vanko, who seems to have like the intellect and just the brains that Tony has.
I really love the scenes that those two are in, Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko, because it really just shows what a dummy Justin Hammer is, but at the same time how really intelligent, and Ivan Vanko knows what he's doing.
Yeah. He's clearly much smarter than Justin Hammer.
Yeah.
And it's and which Justin Hammer just can't deal with because his ego just can't allow there to be someone who's much smarter.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was interesting in the comics, and again, you may know more about this than I do, but one of the things that is kind of a big overarching thing for Tony Stark is that he has pretty major problems with alcohol.
Yeah.
And this movie is really the closest thing in the MCU that we get to that. We see him at the party in the Iron Man suit, drunk off his ass, and it's really interesting because I mean it's actually played more for laughs in Iron Man 2 than it is in the comics. Do you know a little bit more about kind of Tony's like comic book history of dealing with alcohol?
I know that he has an entire storyline that is like around his alcoholism that creeps up later in his life. But yeah, it's one of those things that he definitely fights for a long time.
Yeah, and it's more. I mean, again, here it's more played for laughs, and it's kind of. Not only is it played for laughs, it's kind of the thing that kind of gets him off the hook with kind of like being such a huge jerk to Pepper and to Rhodes, that he was drunk and blah blah blah. You can kind of like let that go. But I don't know. Is that something? I mean, maybe we're too far into the MCU. Is that something that you think you would want to see, or that we're gonna see in the MCU, of really playing up that question of Tony's alcoholism? And do you? I mean, is that even worthwhile to put on film? Considering where we are now?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see that come out in the MCU. I don't know that Disney wants to do that. There was a lot. a series. The story arc that I was talking about is called Demon in a Bottle. And it's a 9-issue story.
Okay.
Really talking about his issue with alcohol. And they did, in filming this, they took a lot of components of that story, and such as the briefcase that he carries with the suit in it.
Yeah.
And just there's some other connection points, and obviously there's things they couldn't do because of rights for different characters, and like they hadn't introduced Ant-Man is in this, and so they hadn't introduced him yet, and so there's all kinds of different things. So they took like what they could, and they wanted to definitely develop that. But I don't know that I don't think Disney will ever really go that far into it.
Yeah.
I think they'll kill Tony Stark off before they do. Just because like these movies, the MCU films themselves they're for kids. I mean, they're definitely more family oriented than say the Netflix series or other things. So they want to definitely keep that in mind too. And so I don't know that they'll go that route. Even making Hank Pym starting his story much later in the MCU, sort of like, because I know he has control issues and abuse past.
Yeah.
So like, with that, they don't have to necessarily get into all of that right now.
Yeah. So. That's a really good point. Hank Pym is one of those characters who has some dark, kind of like abusive of his wife and things like that. Yeah. And it's interesting, I think comics are often thought of as the more childish medium, but I feel like comics have been able to deal with and this isn't just recent. I think in the last really since the genesis of comics, that they've been able to deal with some really dark things.
Well, and they've always been at the cusp of big issues too. Yeah. Whatever that is.
Yeah. And we see that with Marvel now in their comics and the big push that they're doing for diversity in changing their lineup, and they've gotten tons of pushback for that. But I at least applaud the effort. I think it's whether it's been done well, whether it's been successful, is debatable. But I do think that they've definitely done some good things. I agree with you. I think Disney for the films probably won't go there. I think this scene, the scene that we get in Iron Man 2, is probably as deep as we'll get into Tony's alcoholism. But I think it's one of the things that one of the reasons I do appreciate that as a character element is and Tony's great for this. He's so flawed as a hero. Yeah. And he owns that. But he's a womanizer. He's kind of a drunk. He's a narcissist. And being Iron Man is the thing that's actually helped him channel some of his darker impulses into something positive.
Yeah. And really, like, I've always thought of Iron Man as he's very much a copy of Batman in a big way, but he's almost like the opposite side of that same coin. Like, he doesn't hide his identity, and he continues to live out that playboy persona just as the hero. So, which Batman does not do.
Right.
Like, they're both very similar.
Yeah. I mean, not to get into that too deeply, but it is it's Tony's almost dependent on people knowing that he's Iron Man. Whereas Batman is very dependent on keeping that part of him secret. But they're, obviously, similar skill sets, similar, very similar, even in terms of background, and but they've definitely taken different tacks as to how do you live out the billionaire lifestyle. Questions that you and I wrestle with all the time: how to live, how to live our lives as billionaires.
Oh my! I wish those were questions I had to deal with. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to believe that I would do something good with my billionaire lifestyle. But I probably won't get to find that out.
There's some comic references that they make throughout that I just wanted to
go for it.
Point out. During the when he's first talking with Senator Stern, he says Tony Stark says he'll gladly accept the position of Secretary of Defense, and in the comics, Tony Stark does become Secretary of Defense at some point. Yeah. Another one is the nod to War Machine when they're fighting, and he says, "Do you want to become the War Machine?" And, yeah. So I just thought those were fun little nods to the comics.
Well, and another good segue. Let's talk about War Machine. First off, I know we talked about this a little bit when we discussed Iron Man, but we have a casting change here.
Yeah.
And from Terrence Howard to Don Cheadle. I think in talking about this, we were both pretty Don Cheadle, pro Don Cheadle. I loved this recast.
Yeah.
I thought this was just, again, like, enough cannot be said about the MCU's ability to cast top-shelf actors to do these comic book characters.
Yeah. I guess in that first scene when he's introduced and he comes into the courtroom, Tony's like, I didn't know you were going to be here. And he says, I'm here, deal with it, let's move on. And that was sort of like their way of introducing him purposefully because they wanted it to seem like, okay, look, we know this is awkward, and this is a different guy, but like we don't want to make a big deal about it, so James Rhodes, here he is.
and it works. Like, I mean, it totally works. I mean, it works within the film, but it actually kind of works for me too as a viewer. Like, oh, okay, you're James Rhodes. Okay, that's fine. And I'm ready to move on with that. And it really does work very well. Tony is such a damaged character that it actually feels like it requires two people to be his conscience.
Yeah.
Because Rhodes also is his conscience. Like, Pepper's his conscience, but Rhodes is kind of his conscience too.
Yeah.
I think part of what's interesting is it's not just a romantic relationship to keep him grounded. He needs that friend relationship as well to keep him grounded. And we see again as we develop just kind of how important that friendship is for him. And what a thankless job it is to be Tony Stark's friend.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because obviously James Rhodes plays a huge role in Tony's life throughout the rest of the MCU too. But you see, as more characters are added, and whether that's Steve Rogers or Vision, I'm thinking those two in particular also sort of act as a conscience to Tony Stark at different times when he needs it.
Yeah.
So I think, maybe Tony Stark just needs lots of people in his life that are continually putting him in check. And don't we all?
Absolutely.
That's part of life as being humans, but also part of the faith journey too, is that we have to be there for each other because we can't make it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and we do need people who can speak to different parts of us, right?
Yes.
And I think, Rhodes in particular, Pepper is kind of there to help him make good decisions with the business, and to think through what it means for him to be this public figure in the world. And she's kind of the conscience of Tony Stark, and Rhodes is actually kind of the conscience of Iron Man, like of how do you do the hero thing well, because Rhodes has the military background of discipline and honor and all those sorts of things, and he's a lot more of what it means to use your power responsibly, because he's had that training, he's had that experience of what it means to be a good soldier. So yeah, I mean, I think it really is telling of like we have people in our lives who for guys like us, we have people in our lives who show us how to be good fathers, and we have people in our lives who show us how to be good husbands and good friends and good ministers, and we have I've always made the joke that I'm like collecting mentors. I think that's not just mentors. I feel like having friends that keep you accountable in various parts of your life is super important.
Definitely.
Yeah, and again, with someone like Tony Stark, that's a big job.
Yeah, very big.
One of the other connective pieces that kind of goes on into the MCU is that Coulson reappears.
Yes.
And he does a very bad job of keeping Tony from leaving the premises. Mm-hmm. But then he vanishes, because there's something in the Southwest region that he has to take care of. And we see in the cutscene that what he's actually being sent to deal with is the discovery of this hammer that's lying in the middle of the desert in New Mexico.
Yeah. As far as cutscenes go, I think Phase 1, all of the cutscenes are really well done.
Yeah.
They just get you excited for what's to come next.
Yeah.
They don't do that as much anymore, but I have a feeling those will start to happen again in a way that really connects the universe more.
Yeah.
But this one was, great. We'll get into this in Thor, but I wasn't really expecting a whole lot from Thor, and was really impressed with how they went about doing that.
Yeah.
I mentioned this last time in the Avengers Prelude comic called Fury's Big Week. Mm-hmm. They actually cover Iron Man 1, 2, Thor, and Captain America, and sort of do it all in 1 week, which is interesting. I forget why I was going to mention that. Maybe it'll come back later.
But yeah, I mean, again, there's part of what's great about this film is that there is this very intentional world building, and S.H.I.E.L.D's a huge part of that. So Nick Fury and Black Widow and Coulson, they're all part of this web that is going to connect these kind of superhuman people to each other, and it gives you these pieces that connect and make this really great story that's starting to unfold.
Sure.
There's a great piece there. I wanted to come back to something that you mentioned earlier, because I feel like this is actually, and maybe this is part of what I what I enjoyed more, knowing where the MCU is going. I think I appreciated this a little bit more. You talked about a big part of this film is Howard Stark's legacy.
Yeah.
How do you feel like they handled that piece, and how do you see that shown in this film?
Well, it's interesting because so in the first movie you don't really see much of a negative side to Howard Stark's legacy. Mm-hmm. You see him as a hero and just kind of what Tony Stark walks into once he's older. But with adding Vanko, who is it? Ivan Vanko? Mm-hmm.
Ivan's the son. Yeah.
And Anton Vanko's the dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so adding him into that and showing, like, Howard wasn't necessarily, like, all together either. So watching how they sort of deported him, and even though that was part of his past, he sort of tried to cover it up, and so that he would have this legacy, maybe.
Yeah. And it's not a clean legacy, right?
Right.
I mean, there's this piece where we see that Fury tells Tony that your dad was one of the founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he's like, what? And so there's this piece where it's like your dad has been a part of, this security agency all this time. But yeah, he's also done this pretty awful thing to the Vanko family, and taken credit for this thing that is potentially revolutionary. And again, good side is that he was working on this thing that is going to be this clean energy generator, and that is going to be, they're talking about replacing the arms race with an energy race, and eventually, this is going to be about having clean energy available. But yeah, Howard Stern's legacy, I think we see as Tony's Howard Stern. Yeah, we don't care about Howard Stern's legacy. Yeah. Oh, Freudian slip. Howard Stark's legacy is one that, because it's mixed, because it's both light and dark, Tony is trying to live into it, right? And and I think he has both parts, both the light and the dark, that he's trying to live into. And it's really interesting that he becomes kind of, I think we see the beginning of I don't know, maybe it's not the beginning here, but definitely this obsession of carrying on his father's legacy really kind of comes to the forefront here.
It's interesting when Fury first shows up at the donut shop. There's in chalk on the sidewalk, there's written just the numbers 91:5. And Psalms 91:5 says that you will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. And it's almost, and that was on purpose, that part, but I don't know if it was sort of part of Howard Stark's legacy in making S.H.I.E.L.D. That's maybe part of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s motto, is that, like, we're not going to fear night or anything that happens the day. Like, we're going to be able to take care of this kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely feels like their kind of driving ethos, is that they are going to be the thing that keeps the world from fearing. And I mean, if we look at that, I mean, kind of the scary side of that is that they're putting themselves in the place of God.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem that snowballs throughout, the narrative of who S.H.I.E.L.D. is.
Right.
Is that in some ways they start to amass godlike power and kind of think of themselves in a godlike way, and that backfires huge.
Yeah.
Again, it's about the ways. We've talked about this before. It's about the ways that you use power.
Well, and it's just like what Howard Stark and Anton Vanko were fighting against.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with Hydra later. It's the same thing. Like, there's always two sides, and they're not necessarily like good guys, bad guys, but it's like they see power in different ways and use that power in extremely different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is problematic. But again, I think that's
and very timely.
And very timely, of course. I mean, we're talking about this all the time. That the way that we see power being used in our world today, is terrifying. Is it better to show the world that you're strong, and so you take away resources from other places and put them into the military to show the world that you can be as strong and powerful as you want, and that you can, and do you have a war just to prove that you can win wars again, that sort of thing? Or does power come from a different place? Does power come from the ways that we care for the most vulnerable? Does power come from the ways that we ourselves allow us to be vulnerable and open ourselves up to our neighbors and things like that? Obviously, I have a bias. But yeah, I mean, I think this is. I think part of why these stories have such timeless qualities to them is because we're constantly, as Americans, we're constantly having this conversation about how do we use power. What does real power look like? How do we use power? How do we use power to make the world better for everyone? Or do we just use power to make the world better for ourselves?
Right.
And to whom do we give power? To who can we trust with power? And ultimately, power in human hands is a pretty scary thing. And the more power you put in the hands of a single human being, the scarier that gets. So.
Which we see come out of S.H.I.E.L.D. We see that come out of Tony Stark later, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, time and time again, it just keeps coming up, for sure.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts on Iron Man 2?
I remember why I brought up that Avengers Prelude comic earlier.
Awesome.
So the whole scene where he's creating the new element,
mm-hmm.
I feel that's one of my favorite scenes in this movie because it's just Tony Stark, and it's like really showing his thought process. It's also showing his relationship with his father in a deeper way than even he knew, which is really cool. So that development in that story is pretty cool. But so the Avengers Prelude comic called Fury's Big Week, I guess Tony Stark tries to get that element patented under the name of Badassium. But he runs into lots of legal issues with that, I guess. So I just thought that was like a really funny thing to add to this conversation.
That's great.
Yeah.
So anything else on Iron Man 2? I think we're
I don't know. I think that's it.
Yeah,
on my end.
We covered a lot of ground. Cool. So Thor is next up. Yep. Thor's next up on our list, and Thor. We'll get into this in our next conversation. Looking forward to rewatching Thor. I haven't watched it all the way through in a couple years, but I have. Thor is one that I have watched and rewatched a couple times. And Thor was not to say too much, but I think Thor was of the first phase. Thor was the gamble, right? Everyone else was like based in some kind of science, and Thor is kind of like, now we're going to introduce a Norse god.
Well, not even like in science, but like on Earth.
Right.
Thor is the only one that is otherworldly, and it was definitely. It could have been the biggest gamble.
Yeah.
Of phase one.
Yeah, it definitely could have. So we'll talk a little bit about whether or not that gamble paid off. But until then, we got to find a better way to sign the show off, man.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe music or
a catchphrase. I don't know. Well, we're going to work on this. And if anyone who's listening has suggestions of ways for us to sign off, you can tweet at us. You can tweet at Derek L. Weston, at Zane E. Sanders, and then what's our Twitter handle for the show?
At Marvel_Gospel.
Yeah. So
that's it.
Tweet at one or all three or any combination of the three of us if you can think of a better way for us to sign off the show instead of just saying, "Hey, we'll see you next time." But until we have a better sign off, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.